you might expect. There are several that we support. HB 62 is Utah Waterways Amendments. And what it does is it's going to create a resource for teachers in K through 12 to explain the natural water cycle, Utah's water systems, and strategies to optimize use of water. So the idea is to, educate kids early on about the importance and scarcity of water in the West, and to prepare them to, deal with those situations as they grow up. Surprisingly, there was opposition to this during the committee hearing. People saying that, the UN was taking over our educational, the usual stuff. But anyway, it did pass the committee, went to the House, passed the House, and it's now in the Senate. So we are supporting that bill. Another one that we're watching is SB 18, water modifications. And this sort of furthers the protections for water right holders who save water. Mainly this is directed toward agriculture, to make sure that they don't lose their underlying water rights, so that the saved water is categorized as a beneficial use, which means that their water rights are not threatened. And I think this is necessary because the agriculture community has been very slow to buy into the to saving water, because they've been afraid that at some point they're going to lose the water right if they don't use all the water. So that's currently awaiting House passage in the Senate, and if it passes the Senate, then it'll go to the House. There are a lot of bills related to water efficient landscaping, incentives and requirements. HB 11, water efficient landscaping, HB 275, water amendments, HB 401, water usage amendments, and SB 118, water efficiency amendments. So there's stuff going on in water. The major bill I think that I've heard so far is HB 280, which is water related changes. And this is a sort of a major deal changer. This bill was worked on during interim by the Legislative Water Development Commission, the Water Task Force. And the idea of this bill is to create a fund that will address the water infrastructure needs in the state. And the estimate for the backlog of projects, improvements, and new projects is estimated at $38 billion. So there's no way the state can fund that directly out of their own monies. And so this bill would direct the Division of Water Resources to come up with a equitable fee schedule to get fees collected from all water users or providers. It's not, the bill doesn't lay out any of the specifics. It just says that the Division of Water Resources needs to come up with a plan to collect fees from water users and come up with a criteria for how water projects would be funded. And the deadline for doing that would be 2027. So this is a really broad ranging bill. There was a whole lot of discussion on it in the House Natural Resource, Agriculture, and Environment Committee the other day. There was opposition from rural water interests, those concerned about centralizing decision-making in an unelected body, and how the fees are going to be assessed, and how how the awards for water projects will be distributed across the state. So given that, the committee voted to hold the bill and to continue to work on it. it was brought by Representative Casey Snyder, and everybody applauded him for taking on this very, very difficult problem. But clearly nobody's on board yet with the solution. So hopefully they will continue to work on it because there is a glaring need for infrastructure projects within the state or maintenance. And there's just no money to do that. So like I said, hopefully that will get further consideration, maybe later in the session, but it may not come back until next year. We'll have to wait and see on that. So for air quality, there are a couple of bills that the league is supporting. There's HB 279, air quality amendments. And this would require counties pretty much along the Wasatch Front to come up with a plan to reduce basically emissions. It doesn't, I'm not sure that it is specific to vehicles, but reduce emissions by 50% by the end of 2033 from the baseline of 2017. So that's a pretty big ask. That's currently being held in the House Rules Committee. It hasn't gotten out for a committee hearing yet. Another one is HB 126, which is
Norma,
yeah.
Norma, can you say that again? They have to reduce the emissions from the baseline of when?
2017.
2017.
So the baseline is 2017, and by 2033, they would have to reduce emissions by 50%.
Got it.
Let's see, that I said that's in the Rules Committee. HB 126 is emissions reduction regulations amendment, sorry. And this would prohibit the registration of vehicles in certain counties that are very large, over 14,000 pounds, or that emit a certain level of nitrous oxides. That bill has been sent to the House Natural Resource, Agriculture and Environment Committee, but it hasn't been heard yet. So that would have a large impact on our air quality. Okay.
Just a second, Norma. So
yes.
If they can't register their vehicle, they have to register in a different state?
That's a good question. It hasn't been heard in committee yet, so I haven't delved into the details. So
right.
I can let you know once it's been heard, and we'll get a more broad explanation.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I don't know if it means if they're, I guess that makes sense. They could be registered somewhere else. Yeah, I'm sure that'll come out. I hadn't considered that. Thanks, Joe. And then there's a lot of energy in the energy sector. It appears to me from looking at several of the bills that there's a big push to promote the state continuing to use fossil fuel resources for certainly electricity production. There are a couple of bills that propose changes to the state energy policy in HB 374, state energy policy amendments, and HB 241, clean energy amendments. And the league opposes both of these bills. In one of the bills, it would set the priorities for energy production as first being adequate, second reliable, third dispatchable, D affordable, E sustainable, F secure, and last is clean. So obviously the emphasis is on appears to be on continuing to use fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil, to produce electricity in the state, which of course we all know is increasing greenhouse gas emissions and clearly does not fit the clean description.
Norma, does the state get money from those projects, those fossil fuel projects? Is that why they want to continue them?
No, I think it's more to beef up the coal, natural gas, and oil production in the state. So the the uses of fossil fuels in the state, well, maybe not natural gas, but certainly coal, has been declining.
Mhm.
And there are many very powerful representatives in rural Utah whose constituents rely on those jobs, well-paying jobs in the coal and natural gas and oil industries. And so, they're understandably under pressure to maintain that supply. They've tried to do the Uinta Railroad to be able to export more of those fossil fuels. And that's currently on hold or maybe dead because the federal government denied the right of way in one of the areas that they need. So they're looking to bolster the use of fossil fuels within the state for energy production.
If actually for job protection.
I think it's for job protection and cost. They say that, if they and actually that is not, market forces are determining the energy mixes these days, and renewables are much cheaper, but their concern is that they're not reliable.
Oh,
Because, if you can't provide power when it's needed, it's not very useful. So there's a reasonable argument to be made that you need to make renewables workable within the system. But there are ways to do that by storage, battery storage or hydro storage. There are lots of options for storing renewable energy and using it later. But they don't seem to want to invest in those types of projects. They want to just continue to use coal because they say it's reliable and dispatchable, and that's their priority.
and they being the state legislators from those districts.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, this is my evaluation. I'm not saying that it's the right one, but that's certainly how I see things. I don't know if anybody has other thoughts on it. Maybe we can talk about that if there's time. So anyway, that's what they're doing. And in addition, there's a bill, SB 120, the Intermountain Power Agency modifications, that would change the governing board for the Intermountain Power Project, which is in Delta, Utah. Historically, that power plant used coal and natural gas, Utah's supplies of coal and natural gas to run their plant. They are building a newer plant that is supposed to go online in 2025 that will burn a mix of natural gas and hydrogen, which will be a cleaner source of energy. And so the legislature wants to take over their board because they want to continue to burn coal at the plant that's going to be retired. And kind of the hitch to this is that very little of the power produced at the Intermountain Power Plant is actually consumed in Utah. It's about 5%.
Oh my gosh.
95% of the power goes to Los Angeles area. And California has regulations in place where they will not accept power produced by fossil fuels. And I don't know what the deadline is. It might be 2025 because that's the projection to switch to a cleaner fuel source. So again, this seems like a mechanism for the legislature to control this retiring power plant and continue to burn coal. But what's not clear is who's gonna consume the power. So anyway, this has been an ongoing battle with IPP for several years. And this is kind of the culmination that the legislature is saying, well, if you won't do what we want, we're going to take it over and do what we want.
Shirley has a question.
Yes. Oh, I think you're muted, Shirley.
Yesterday in the Salt Lake Trib, there was the article about the EPA trying to force Utah to get rid of the fossil fuels and clean the air. And this statement by the legislature of why they're not doing it. So it's a good article to read.
Yes, it is. Thank you for bringing that up. That has there's another bill that I'm going to talk about that relates to that as well.
And Norma, could I just interject one thing about that bill, that one
Yeah.
SB 120? And I'm sure you saw this too. During the interim, it was very interesting how the committee, the interim committee that was watching and discussing this IPA modifications set up as a pretext for taking over the board, this idea that the board hadn't been transparent and they hadn't produced minutes quickly enough for a legislative audit. And as I was listening to it, I kept thinking, you know, what's the plan here? They clearly are just nitpicking, and instead of giving them a chance to maybe improve their processes, they're using this as a pretext to take over the board. And now we know, but they've been setting that up through the whole interim. And so it was just an interesting process to watch unfold.
Right. Yeah, good point. Thank you. So there are another couple of, sorry, where am I here? A little lost here. Okay, so this kind of, this article that Shirley was mentioning, there are a couple of bills that aren't necessarily natural, well, they are natural. I think they're aimed at natural resource issues. And they're coming under the banner of state sovereignty. So there's this big push, you know, that Utah is a sovereign state, and, you know, the feds can't tell us what to do. And, you know, we've seen this play out in Texas as well with the border issues and other states that are just saying, you know, we can do what we want, and the federal government can't make us do anything, basically, that we don't want to do. So in HB 48, Utah Energy Act's amendments, this would direct the Office of Energy Development to advocate for state interests on federal energy, environmental programs, oversee legal strategy on federal overreach and permitting delays, and adopt a master plan for the state. So again, they're asking and this obviously relates to energy issues, but they're basically putting in place, you know, a mechanism to push back on federal regulations that they don't approve of. And one of the examples is the EPA. And this came up in another discussion in a bill, SB 57, which is Utah Constitutional Sovereignty Act. And interestingly, this bill was heard in the House Natural Resource, Ag, and Environment Committee, which seems like an odd place if it's basically talking about Utah sovereignty. But again, it's clearly directed at the at natural resource and environmental directives from the federal government. So this bill establishes a framework for the legislature using concurrent resolutions to prohibit the enforcement of a federal directive within the state by government officers if the legislature determines the federal directive violates the principles of state sovereignty.
Wow.
So that is a biggie.
Yeah.
And given that our legislature has a veto-proof Republican majority, you know, it's hard to imagine that whatever they decide is, you know, goes against the state sovereignty could be used with this bill. And I say the example given during the committee hearing was the ozone transport rule, which required Utah to lower its nitrous oxide emissions from its generally the Huntington and, oh shoot, what's the other one? Huntington and, anyway, the two coal-fired plants in Emory County. That the EPA said were responsible for exporting ozone into the Denver area and making their air quality out of attainment. So this is, like I say, this is a bill that could be used to prevent enforcement of any federal rule until the government sues and the state prevails. So we know how long these things can be wrapped up in court. And it's, to me, it's a little bit frightening that, you know, the EPA or any other federal agency for that matter could be prevented from enforcing its rules until they go to court and prove that Utah doesn't have, you know, doesn't have sovereignty over this issue. So this bill got a lot of discussion as well, but it did pass because there's a Republican majority in the House Natural Resource Ag and Environment Committee, and it passed out on a party line 8-2. And it's now been through the Senate, and it's passed the House. It's now in the Senate concurrence calendar. So this one really scares me for a lot of reasons. But anyway,
that's going to pass.
Oh yeah, that's going to pass. That's going to pass.
Yeah. Man.
So, and I think it'll have a huge impact in the environmental and natural resource areas, energy. But it could also have, you know, large effects elsewhere. So, that's all I have on the natural resource bills, and we'll let Cynthia take over with the rest. Thanks.
Do you want me to start right away, Jill, or do you want to see if people have questions for Norma?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good idea. Do we have questions that would be appropriate now for Norma, or should we wait? Just if you put your hand up if you've got something for right now. Okay, Shirley?
What was the number on that last bill? HB what?
No, it's SB 57.
Thank you.
And the league, let's see, it's a watch on our tracker, but you know, I don't know if there'll be any action on that one or not, but.
Yeah. Amy, do you have something?
Are there any bills concerning wildlife?
There probably are. I think I've seen one. But I'm sorry, I haven't looked into that carefully. But
Okay,
you can look on our bill
Look it up.
tracker.
And Norma, the way to get to the bill tracker is to go to the lwvutah.org website, and then the bill tracker link is there, correct?
It's on the 2024 legislative session, I believe. Is that right, Cynthia? It's the
That's
first
correct.
thing it's the first thing when you click on the top bar where it says Utah or the 2024 general legislative session or something like that.
It takes you to the list of our priorities, but if you keep scrolling down, there's a big button, and if you hit that, the whole bill tracker pulls up. So I could share that to my screen, maybe if you need it.
Cindy, I'll put it in the chat because you're going to be busy with the chat.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, Cynthia.
Okay, I just want to segue from what Norma said about SB 57 and HB 48 and say one of the reasons that the League has just been watching these bills rather than opposing or supporting is because there's nothing that pops out that clearly aligns with a position at the national level or at our local level. We tend to support local control, but we also support the federal Constitution. And so these bills seem to put those two at odds, right? And so it may be that we end up opposing as this goes on. But I wanted to mention along those same lines that, you know, the state is already involved, as you know, in a lawsuit that's now at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals related to the Antiquities Act and the restoration in 2021 that Joe Biden did of the Bears Ears and Staircase Escalante monuments. And the whole idea there is about state sovereignty as far as Utah legislators are concerned. And interestingly, besides the two bills that Norma discussed, a new one that we're watching, which is very unlikely to have this same motif in it, but it does, is an education bill, SB 137. And again, we're just watching it, which essentially sets up a legal defense fund for any public school teachers or local education agencies who may go afoul of federal law related to education, particularly, I think, where this bill is striking is for students with disabilities. We have a lot of students with disabilities who struggle with their behavior. And teachers and local education agencies are very, it's very prescribed what they can and can't do in those situations, mostly to protect children. And so this bill almost encourages teachers to act in a way that's outside of federal guidelines right now. And I would suggest outside federal guidelines related to the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. So it's difficult because were teachers to act outside of that, they would lose their licenses, regardless of, how long anything was in court. And teachers follow IDEA. So you have here another example of sort of trying to indemnify state officials or employees when they are acting in opposition to federal guidelines or laws. It's called teacher empowerment. There are some aspects of it that might be considered empowering to teachers, like getting paid for some of their professional development that's outside of contract hours, but much of it has the same state sovereignty theme to them. And so it's just another one that we're watching, but this seems to be pervasive in a lot of our bills this session, and somewhere you wouldn't expect to find it. So I wanted to mention, and am I speaking too loud? Because I have headphones in.
It's perfect.
Okay. Martha discussed her action alert. And for those who don't know, because there may be some that don't know online, HB 261, the Equal Opportunity Initiatives, which is sponsored by Representative Hall and then Senator Grover. And essentially, this is going to, and it's already passed, so we're asking the governor to veto it. This is going to eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and the kinds of support that were attendant to those, as well as the kinds of training that were attendant to those at public institutes of public education, whether they're higher or secondary or elementary. This was something that many people, as I listened to this go through, many people opposed and many people supported. It was very, very emotional on the part of everyone. And our president of the league sent actually the following information as a letter to Governor Cox. The League of Women Voters respectfully asks you to veto HB 261, whose title belies the intent of this legislation, this idea of equal opportunity. For far too long, Black students and other students of color have been excluded and underrepresented within our higher education system. Higher education institutions should be able to consider the whole person, including race, in all aspects of their work. A student body that is reflective of our society, one that includes more representation of people of color within systems, structures, and institutions, benefits all students and society as a whole. The League of Women Voters believes every citizen should be protected in the right to vote. Every person should have access to free public education that provides equal opportunity for all, and no person or group should suffer legal, economic, or administrative discrimination. What most of you online may not realize is, besides how this affects what's very visible, which is DEI offices or similar offices at public institutions of higher ed, this actually also would prohibit any kind of office, focus, training, etc., in all of K-12 public schools. So it's very comprehensive, and it's something that the league has really worried about. particularly since what is not in dispute is that there is still a gap in, at least in elementary and public education, and certainly that could be said of higher education. Higher education, you're looking at admissions and graduation, but there's still a significant gap in public education related to the outcomes, the student outcomes for minority groups, people of color, and of course, students receiving special instruction. So we're opposed to this, and this is Martha's call to action. So anything you can do as an individual, I think, would be really helpful. We watch most of all voting stuff. I mean, that's who we are. We're the League of Women Voters, right? With men in our ranks. And essentially a couple of things that are going on in that realm we actually support. And one is HB 83, and it expands the scope of what is a crime and what is an offense against a public servant or party official who is actually performing that public servant's official function. So we're hoping that this would protect everybody from every party, election workers, people involved in the business of government who have been so threatened in recent elections. And so we are very supportive of HB 83. We are very opposed to HB 92. This is Representative Kirkland's bill, which essentially would ask voters to specifically state that they want to opt into mail-in voting. And the discussion around that has mainly focused on how this will be so confusing to people. We're in Utah, we're used to getting our ballots in the mail. We have not only become used to that, but it's especially helpful for people who might need assistance, who have disabilities, as well as people in rural areas who find it hard to physically get to a place to vote. And what we are especially afraid of is that this will not only create confusion, this bill, but it will disenfranchise voters who are not adequately informed or who have barriers. It's one of those things that puts up a barrier where right now the barrier has been taken down for participation. So we're very opposed to this particular bill, HB 92.
Cynthia?
Mhm.
Cynthia?
Yes,
Brooklyn, I
yes,
think.
please, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn says that this will increase participation. I see no way that that bill making people ask for a mail-in ballot will increase the participation.
Right. It's been shown in other states and in our state that having a mail-in ballot has increased participation. I mean,
Yeah.
There's no disputing those numbers. They're nonpartisan numbers, right? And I think this is one of those. There are lots of things in that I see, and I primarily watch education. I also watch some of the other ones, but that's one of my jobs on the LAC. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of times we make things partisan, and I'm not suggesting that this question was in any way, because I don't think it was, but we make things partisan that are actually just a matter of good policy, right? Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, not unaffiliated, the numbers say you're going to participate more when you have a ballot sent to your home, your place of residence, your apartment, and more people who otherwise have barriers, whether it's their job, they're working two jobs, transportation issues, physical disabilities, those individuals are going to be people living in rural areas that are far away from voting areas, voting centers. They are going to have more accessibility to the vote than when they don't have a mail-in ballot. So the statistics suggest that this is having a mail-in ballot, it does increase participation significantly.
Yeah, I know. I think that's common knowledge now, but Kara Birkeland says the opposite. And I find that very ingenuous.
Yes, I think that the data just simply doesn't support that. By the way, just speaking of data, I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say on HB 261, the Equal Opportunity Initiative, there is absolutely a complete dearth of data on two things, actually, on what sorts of resources have been diverted to DEI. It looks to be a very, very small percentage of a university's operational budget, like, less than 0.5% or something. On the other hand, there's been no data to demonstrate that these support services have been extra helpful either. I mean, what I think about this bill is that it's a knee-jerk, it's a knee-jerk reaction to sort of a political environment. And what it doesn't do is it's not data informed. It's a very poor policy decision, because what should have happened is what the League of Women Voters does on that, which is to do a study, right? I mean, they should have actually looked into whether or not the squeeze is worth the juice on that lemon. And they should have also looked into unintended consequences. For instance, one of those that's come up already in the newspaper is that this may put in jeopardy the University of Utah's scholarships for Native American students from the Ute tribe. I don't think anybody wants that. That's been a long-standing relationship that the university is very proud of, that has been worked out with the Ute Nation. So there's a whole bunch of unintended consequences there too, beyond even what we can sort of obviously see, particularly in K-12 education. But regardless, I think a lot of these, I think that whatever bill has not had the benefit of an evidence-based and data-based decision-making process is going to be poor policy. It has nothing to do with a partisan view. It's just that's a poor way to go about passing good legislation in our state. And certainly this voting amendment would fall into that category.
Thank you.
I'm watching the clock, and I'm going to say the other thing that we are concerned about and oppose would be HB 185. And remember, voting bills are our biggest priority because of who we are as a league, even though there are a whole bunch of other ones that our members are interested in, understandably. And HB 185, which Representative Tusher has sponsored, basically does away with the opportunity for an individual to get on the ballot through the signature process if the convention, if a candidate in the convention process receives 70% or more of the vote. So in that nominating convention. And I'll tell you what this does, whether it's on the left or the right, because you're looking at how this would play out if this were a national bill instead of just a state bill. It tends to promote the most extreme of candidates, rather than allowing for an opportunity for people who are more moderate to get on the ballot. And what we've seen both on a national and on a local scale is that a lot of times if those moderates are on the ballot, they tend to be very appealing to voters. And that is supported by data. One example of how devastating this would be, and this is an education example from last election cycle, is that in a particular part of of Salt Lake County, or maybe it was Utah County, now I can't remember, but Cindy Davis, who's now on the State Board of Education and already had been on the Board of Education, she's a moderate Republican. And her party did not nominate her for the most recent election, even though she was an incumbent, to be their candidate for the Board of Education because she wasn't extreme enough. Now, because signature gathering allows you to be on the ballot, she had already, anticipating that maybe she was too moderate for her party, had been gathering signatures. She eventually, because we have a signature gathering process in place, she was able to get on the ballot along with the individual who was nominated by her party, and she won the election. Now that's an example, regardless of where you fall politically, that without the signature gathering process, there are candidates whom constituents would choose, that constituents will never have an opportunity to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so we definitely oppose not having the signature gathering process because, as you know, as a league, we are very keen on the idea of voters having choice of voters having access to the vote and of all citizens being able to participate in their government. And so we feel like this bill limits that in a number of ways. I'm going to highlight just a couple. Another one dealing with voting, which I think, again, is one of our important issues, is HB 214. And it would require an election officer to receive a ballot before the polls close on election day. And that would put the onus, that would take my choice in some ways out of my hands if I had a bad postal service, if I lived maybe on the Navajo reservation, what have you. If I can't rely on my postal service to get it there, even though I got it postmarked by a certain day, my vote would be disallowed. And so luckily this one has been held and doesn't seem to be going through. And so I bring it up because there are all these little ways that these bills have for some reason been trying to limit voters' access to participation in their elections. And these are, worrisome to us, right? So I wanted to highlight just one or two more because I know that we want to leave a little bit of time for questions. In education, we have HB 29. This is one of those ones that the league is watching, but I kind of wanted to explain why we're only watching this, or why we're not opposing or supporting, in other words. This is kind of an add-on to the sensitive materials legislation that was passed last year. Representative Ken Ivory and Todd Weiler are kind of, the ones who have been behind this push. And it created a bright line that said anything that has any of this in it is pornography, and we remove it from shelves. These other things we look at kind of in the whole to see if they don't quite reach the bright line standard. If these things are questionable, people can make a challenge, and we'll have to have this process to consider them. Well, this particular bill says if there are so many districts and so many charters, it kind of gives a mathematical equation, if you will, that's very simple. If this many remove it from the shelves, then all of the LEAs, charters and districts, all public schools in the state at the K through 12 level have to remove that same resource. Now, one of the reasons that the league is watching this is because we tend to favor local control, and we feel like this maybe takes away the ability of different districts and charter school LEAs to respond to their own populations. In addition, we're concerned that in a sense, it means that a very small minority of parents who don't like a particular text can speak for the entire rest of the state. And it doesn't really acknowledge the different lived experiences that, say, a high school student in urban Salt Lake City or in Ogden is having from somebody in a more rural area in Delta or Blanding or Morgan. And the league leans toward letting those groups decide for themselves. Some good things about it is it does limit the number of challenges that a single individual can make in a certain year, so that we won't have these hundreds upon thousands of complaints that have been really burdensome to the K-12 system. But we're watching it because it's worrisome to us, but we don't really have a position yet. We also, yes, please.
I'm going to cut you off right there.
Please. That's great.
Because, no, it's good. This is amazing. But this is being recorded, so the recording will go out to everybody. That's good. I wanted to give Chris Cherniak a chance to weigh in here. And then if we have extra time, we can take questions.
Well, actually, thanks, because I actually had a question or a comment regarding that last proposed law about banning books. As again, a point of clarification, if I understand it right, the numbers seem to vary so far in drafts. But let's say 4 school districts decide to ban a book from their school libraries, not public libraries, but their school libraries. That means that all 41 school districts in the state of Utah would also have to follow that ban. Is that just condensed, correct?
Yes, not just all 40 school districts, but each charter is its own district. So the 120 authorized charter schools, which probably represent about 120 additional LEAs that serve 80,000 students, would also have to do that. Yes.
It's just nothing short of stunning, but I'll leave it there. Yeah, let me get into my updates. Unfortunately, I'll start with the virus. As a continued member of the Board of Health, that's where this information comes from, why I cover it. But I tried to get on to the Summit County Health Department's data dashboard this morning, and it's not running or up. So I don't have the latest data with respect to virus antigens that are showing up in our wastewater, because they use wastewater now as a proxy to detect the presence of the coronavirus, et cetera. But the latest data I don't have. Generally, again, the story continues. It's around. We just had Sundance. We'll probably see an uptick. Anecdotally, I'm sure everybody continues to know people that test positive. There are still people ending up in the hospital, and nationally, there's roughly 100 people that die each day as a result of COVID. So it's still here, and it's still around, and that doesn't count the seasonal flu conditions and RSV, another type of virus, etc. So we continue to be kind of immersed in COVID. It's not going away. But I apologize, I don't have any real immediate numbers. Again, maybe you have some stories to share when we have a minute or two. So that's the virus update of sorts. Turning to the drought, the other thing I do as part of it as an environmental engineer, well, you can look outside and you can see that we haven't had much of a storm, any snowstorms here in the last week or so. And in fact, temperatures have been running above average, and the last round of precipitation we had last week was somewhat not the classic dry snow, more wet snow, and it fell and it melted. We're supposed to have another storm in another few days or so, but our temperatures are above average. Drought wise though, the state, about 10% of the state is in a drought of some form or another. That's up a few percentage points from last month. No surprise, and we'll probably, if things continue to unfold as they are, we'll probably see drought in the eastern half of the state slowly make its way west, move west across the state. Here in Summit County, Wasatch County, we're still not in a drought condition, any formal definition of a drought. So we're in the clear, but we're definitely behind on our snowfall rates. But to be continued there. So that's the story with. You know what? I'll pause for any questions or so, or comments to anybody else. Thank you. None. Well, real quick, then I hate dead air as a radio show host. Dead air. This is really amazing. We all know that 2023 was the warmest year on record on a global basis. And 2024 will probably be also, if not the warmest, because we're still in an El Nino condition. 2024 will also be probably at least in the top 5 warmest. But the last 10 years are now the warmest 10 years on record. Okay, since records have formally been kept back to the 1880s or so. So not in order, but every year of the last 10 years, going back to 2014, are in the top 10 warmest years. So 2013, 2012, 2011, they were all warm. They're not even in the top 10 anymore. And so
Chris,
yeah.
Just a second. Chris, when you say the warmest in 10 years. Is that for the world, for the
Yeah,
United States?
globally, on a global basis.
Whole world,
The
okay,
last 10 years are the warmest 10 years ever recorded. Okay, that's never happened before.
okay,
Because there's always an outlier. Oh, 1998 was warm or 1936 was warm. No, since 2014, these past 10 years, they are now in the top 10 warmest years. Okay, that is a trend, boy. If you want to say a trend, that's a trend. And every year going forward, my estimate, every year going forward will be in the top 10 at least. So
Okay.
that's our trends going forward. I'll stop there.
okay, any other questions on that? Chris, what are your recommendations on COVID? If people are still getting it, should we be getting a new vaccine every 6 months, or what should we be doing?
That's what I plan on doing. Yeah, every 6 to 7 months. It's not a bad idea. They will be available. They'll be modified to acclimate, to adapt to latest variations. And so that's probably a prudent approach to continuing to address this.
What about the RSV?
I don't know much about enough about RSV to say that we should have a continued vaccination for that one. That one I'll have to check on
Okay,
and get back to you. But yeah, COVID is always evolving, like any virus. It's always evolving.
all right,
We have to adapt to address that.
all right, you all. Any last minute thoughts that we need to before we shut this off? Thank you all for being here. Take care. Be safe.
Thanks so much, Jill.